Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for those who heard the first introduction, and thank you to everyone who's just joined us for this urgent movement briefing. My name is Sheda, and I'm an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I'm honored to be your host tonight. I'm joined today with organizers from World Beyond War, the Palestine Solidarity Network, and the Palestinian Youth Movement, and journalists from the Maple. I want to open up by grounding us in the reality that brings us together today. Today, the genocide has reached the 662nd day, a genocide that has entered a new horrifying phase, a starvation campaign that is not incidental, but intentional, aimed at exterminating an entire people. Entire families are dying, not just by airstrikes, but from thirst, from hunger, and infection. Aid workers are being assassinated, hospitals are being turned to rubble, and this is a genocide, not a conflict, not a war, not a natural disaster, but a calculated, systematic, and intentional genocide. A genocide made possible by the complicity and the backing and the cooperation of governments like Canada. And in the face of this genocide, every single one of us here has made a choice. We have chosen not to look away. We have chosen not to let our governments kill in our name. We have shown up over and over again in the streets, in our unions, in our places of worship, in the halls of parliament to demand that this country stop arming a genocidal regime. For nearly 2 years, we've made one thing clear. There can be no justice while Canada continues to send weapons to Israel, that there must be a full two-way arms embargo now. Earlier this week, just 2 days ago, we launched a historic report authored by the Palestinian Youth Movement, World Beyond War, and the Arms Embargo Now coalition. And this report confirmed what we've known for months and months and months, that Canada never stopped arming Israel. And the government didn't just ignore us, they attempted to deceive us. But that lie ends now. So tonight is not just a webinar. It is an urgent movement briefing. It is a space to align, to strategize, and to organize. And we in this moment are not alone. We are joined by thousands, millions across the globe. The tide is shifting from France to Belgium. The demand for an arms embargo has been taken up by the masses. And here in Canada, we are closer than we've ever been to forcing a rupture. We have the evidence. We can prove for a fact that Canada is arming Israel. Now, the question is, what will we do with this moment? This briefing will talk us through the findings, the strategy, and the tools. And it will make one thing clear. We are closer than we've ever been to forcing this government's hand. And we will not stop until we win a full, permanent, and total arms embargo. And I will pass it on to Rachel from World Beyond War to talk us through the arms embargo campaign.
Thank you so much, Shada, and thank you to everyone who's here. We're over 500 people here tonight on a webinar that I think we announced 48 hours ago. It's just really, it's like really touching to be here all together tonight, and it just means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to all of the organizations who and all of the people who've worked so hard to put this report out. I want to briefly explain a little bit about the Arms Embargo Now campaign and what brings us to this moment before we move on to what's in this report, what can we present to you about it, and then where do we go from here. So over a year ago, World Beyond War and a number of other organizations really recognized that a key way that Canada was directly supporting Israel's genocide in Palestine was through weapons. There are many ways we know that Canada is complicit in this genocide, but a very direct and material contribution Canada was making was literally providing the weapons of war to Israel and purchasing weapons, flowing funds directly into companies like Elbit Systems and Israel's biggest war profiteers. So a year ago, just over a year ago, last May, a bunch of allied organizations came together to launch the Arms Embargo Now campaign. Recognizing that also an arms embargo is a very clear tool that is very well known to the Canadian government. If you go to the Global Affairs Canada website, it defines an arms embargo as follows. It says an arms embargo aims to prevent weapons and military equipment from leaving or reaching a targeted country. So this is absolutely something that the Canadian government can do, has done before, and frankly needs to do in the context of Israel. So when we look at the arms trade, with the Canada-Israel arms trade, there's really three pillars of it. And this is important because when we talk about a full arms embargo, a two-way arms embargo, that's us saying you need to actually stop the flow of all weapons to and from Israel. And that happens in three ways. So the first is that weapons are exported directly from Canada to Israel. So that's weapons companies in Canada make parts of many of the machines of war that Israel is using, whether it be fighter jets, helicopters, drones, machine guns, tanks, etc. And those are exported from Canadian companies straight to Israel, and they require a permit that's issued to them from Global Affairs Canada, which is the department that Foreign Affairs Minister right now, Anita Anand, is responsible for. So the first part of the Canada-Israel arms trade is that weapons are exported directly from Canada to Israel. They have to apply for a permit, they get a permit, and then they ship their weapons. And they make some money off of it. Second path is a tricky one, and it's what we've been calling the US loophole. Canada has a really unique relationship with the US. I could talk about that at length, but I won't. But so much so that Canadian laws around arms exports exempt the US. So everybody else, every other country on earth, if Canada is going to export them weapons, there have to be permits, there has to be tracking. It's insufficient, but there is a regime there. For the US, conveniently, Canadian companies can export weapons to the US almost entirely without requiring permits and without regulation. So it turns out of the billions of dollars of weapons that Canadian manufacturers ship to the US every single year, a whole bunch of them, we don't know exactly how many because there's no transparency, but a whole bunch of them go from Canada to the US and then from the US to Israel. This is what we're calling the US loophole, and the Canadian government knows about it, but they have done absolutely nothing to address it. The final way that the Canada-Israel arms trade plays out is that Canada buys a ton of weapons from Israeli companies, in many cases from Israeli state-owned companies who are making the weapons of war that Israel is using and then also are selling them to countries all over the world, often labeled as battle-tested. And there's egregious examples of, for example, Rafael literally advertising their weapons to countries like Canada using real footage of these weapons being used to kill Palestinians in Gaza. And then Canada buys these weapons for often our military, but some are for police services and other parts of the government as well. And that's Canadian tax dollars going right to Israeli weapons companies and to the Israeli state. So when we say a full arms embargo on Israel, we're talking about a full arms embargo. We're talking about no weapons travel between Canada or Israel, period. And the definition of weapons, and we're saying the arms trade, the definition is very clear under international law, under Canadian law. Every military component that is part of these weapon systems, that counts as arms trade. So it doesn't matter if it's the gun itself, if it's the bullet, if it's the sensor that's inside the fighter jet that's dropping the bombs, that is all part of the Canada-Israel arms trade, and that's what we need to end. This is a material interruption to genocide. Without the weapons provided to it from Canada, from the US, from European countries, Israel literally could not carry out its assault on Gaza. And this is a deeply winnable demand. Frankly, this is the bare minimum the Canadian government needs to do. There is so much more Canada needs to do to not be complicit in Israel's genocide, but truly the bare minimum is to stop arming it. So, what has this fight looked like so far? So a year ago, we launched and we've now hit over 500 endorsing organizations across the country. So that includes the biggest public sector unions in the country, faith organizations, human rights organizations, environmental, indigenous, of course, Palestinian organizations. It's a lot of the biggest organizations in the country, as well as grassroots groups from coast to coast to coast who are all taking action where they can for an arms embargo. So collectively, we represent many, many millions of people across the country who have stood firm behind this demand. We have also been getting MPs to sign on for an arms embargo. Before the recent election, we'd hit 50 MPs, maybe 49 MPs, just about 50. And now, obviously, we've restarted with the new MPs who have been elected and are in power now. And 37 currently sitting MPs have officially signed on to the demand for an arms embargo, one of which did so last night. So already we're seeing that our pressure is bringing more MPs on board. We've held coordinated days of action across the country where we converged at MP offices, where we protested at factories that are making parts for Israel's fighter jets. Just last month in June, we put out a call for people to deliver letters to their MP's office demanding an arms embargo. That happened. There were hundreds of deliveries to more than 80 different members of parliament across the country. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say hundreds of thousands of people all across the country over the past year and a half of 21 months have marched, petitioned, written letters, flown kites, held weapons factory blockades, held vigils, town halls, taken their own independent actions to demand an arms embargo. We are a broad movement bringing together so many people, and it has had a huge impact. So, what does that look like? Our movement pressure has forced the Canadian government to break rank from its own history as one of Israel's biggest allies, um, and really from many other NATO countries, by making some tweaks to the Canada-Israel arms trade, but perhaps more significantly, we forced the Canadian government to admit that it is unacceptable to arm Israel. And for the past several months, that has played out by them publicly, many times in various ways, saying that Canada is no longer arming Israel. Obviously, if you're here tonight, you probably have some sense that this is not in fact true, and our report shows that Canada is still arming Israel. But I do want to take a moment to highlight that we backed them into a corner. We made it impossible for them to get up and say, oh, yeah, Canada is going to keep arming Israel, which has been their position for decades. It was unthinkable for Canada to not arm Israel. We made it impossible for them to get up on a stage, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, the whole government, and say that it was okay for Canada to arm Israel. Unfortunately, instead of acting with integrity, instead of enacting an arms embargo, the government lied. They pivoted, they obfuscated, they misrepresented, they said gobbledygook about permits and pauses and so forth, all to try to confuse us, to placate us, to create the illusion that the flow of arms had stopped. This became a huge barrier for our movements. And we realized this after the election when we approached MPs, we were trying to get them to sign on to the demand, and they overwhelmingly told us, I agree with you. Not overwhelmingly. Many told us, I agree with you, but Canada already has an arms embargo. And there was Carney on stage in the election saying Canada has an arms embargo. There was Jolie saying this every second day. And it was a real impediment to our movement because it was hard to get the government to do something that they were saying they were already doing. So that is where this report came in. We realized that we needed to prove that Canada was not doing what it's saying, that they had built a web of lies, and that in fact, weapons were continuing to flow every single day from Canada to Israel. Not to mention that Canada was still buying these weapons as well. And so with that, I would really love to turn the stage over to Haneen, who's an organizer with the PYM and one of the key research leads on this report. So grateful to all of her work bringing this together. Over to you, Haneen.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'll be walking you through the groundbreaking report that was authored by PYM and World Beyond War. And for the first time, basically, this report gives the public a clear and detailed picture of how Canada has armed and enabled Israel's war machine, even as our government claimed otherwise. Canada, as a signatory to the Geneva Convention and Arms Trade Treaty, has a legal obligation to not be complicit in genocide, or even enable grave violations of international law. And yet this report uncovers a systematic deception, one where Canada-made weapons have continued to flow directly into what has become one of the most deadliest and most sustained military assault in modern history. While weapons reach Israel through various indirect channels, such as, I think, Rachel, you mentioned it before, but through the United States, for example, this report will focus solely on direct shipments from Canada. And these findings presented here, basically what I'm saying is that these findings only represent a small visible portion to a much larger volume of transfers that are actually happening. Try to keep it as short as I can. I'm on a timer here, but so in this report, we've actually used two main sources of data to uncover what was otherwise hidden from the public view. So first, we looked into import records from the Israeli Tax Authority data, which basically tracks everything that's coming in to Israel. So think of it as like a version of a border customs system. These records are updated regularly, and each of them are classified by what we call HS codes. And HS codes is basically a system that's used globally to identify different types of goods. And between October 2023 until now, we've found that 391 shipments were sent to Israel from Canada. And they're not just vague, categories of shipments. There are specific listings for bullets, military components, aircraft, surveillance, and technology, and more. Now, Melanie Joly may have told us in 2024 that Canada stopped sending arms to Israel, but the ITA's own data exposes that lie. Military shipments did not actually stop, and they've continued well into 2025. I will basically in the report, you're going to see three sections of these extracted data from the Israeli Tax Authority. The first one is, as you can see on the screen, is the ammunition and bomb parts. What we see is that in just one shipment made back in April 2025, Canada sent $175,000 worth of military grade bullets to Israel. And although this report really just focuses on October 2023 to now, we went a few months back just to see what was happening, and we saw that in August 2023, right before the genocide, Canada exported at least 10 million bullets, directly arming Israeli forces in their ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. In the second category of the ITA, we see basically the category of surveillance and strategic technology. So we can see that Canada sent nearly $75 million worth of high-tech equipment to Israel. And what these are is basically radar systems, laser tech, radio navigation tools. It's like the kind of hardware that is used to track people, guide weapons, and have these coordinated strike. And what's even more alarming is that out of these $79 million worth of shipment, more than half of that, so 44 million, was sent just in the first 6 months of 2025. And just because these are not bombs or bullets, it doesn't mean that they're not deadly. This kind of technology is the backbone of modern warfare. It enables precision strike, real-time surveillance, and targeted destruction. Tech warfare is just as lethal. It allows the bombs to land exactly where they intend them to. And the last category that we've extracted from the Israeli Tax Authority is the parts of aircraft and drone parts. And what we see is that since 2025, Canada exported $9 million worth of aircraft parts. And these will include drones, helicopters, military aircraft, and even landing gears. And since October 2023, Canada reached $26 million worth of shipments from Canadian-made companies. And these parts aren't these parts are basically what's keeping Israel's fleet in the sky. And this report shows that Canada is directly facilitating this. So this is basically an overview of our first source, which was the Israeli Tax Authority data. And this is public information that anyone can find online. And if you go through the report, you can find the sources to go and take a look yourself. Our second source is going to be about shipments that we found through commercially available shipping data. Okay, so unlike the Israeli Tax Authority, which shows us a total by category, month, and value, in this part of the report, we talk about 47 shipments found, which are based on actual shipping receipts. Okay, which means that these receipts are basically called bill of ladings, and you can think of it kind of like when you purchase something online and you receive an email and you have like that order number that you're able to track, and it tells you what was shipped, where was shipped, how was delivered, by whom. So this is basically what we have in this second data source. So these records will give us a clear and undeniable look at Canada's involvement. And the key point in this section is that these 47 shipments, most of them were sent directly to the infamous Elbit Systems. And Elbit Systems, for those who don't know, is Israel's largest weapons manufacturer. I'll walk you through a few highlights of this section. So first, the shipments came from cities across Canada. So Montreal, we have Montreal, Halifax, Ottawa, Vancouver, Calgary, Waterloo, and the GTA. So this is not just coming from one company, but from 21 different companies. So this basically is an entire Canadian military supply chain. And a few of the findings that I want to highlight is actually one in Quebec, Repentigny. They're basically General Dynamics shipped cartridges to Israel 11 days after the government publicly promised that this kind of export stopped. And even more shockingly, these cartridges were actually sent to Israel just last week on the 18th of July. In Halifax, we have Stelia, which basically is an aerospace company who has sent parts explicitly labeled as military aircraft parts. And in the report, you'll see a brief description of all the companies named in the report, and you'll be able to also see a description and what they do and how they're complicit. But one thing I want to note is that Stelia is a key player of the F-35 jet program. The F-35 is basically one of the most advanced and destructive fighter jets in the world. Those are the same F-35 jets that have been dropping over 2,000-pound bombs in Gaza. They're the same jets that have been killing Palestinians and annihilating neighborhoods in Gaza. Another company that I want to highlight is Nexia Canada, which they've sent basically testing equipments for military aircraft. And these systems are used to check whether the weapon system are functioning properly or not. That means that they're not just spare parts. They're used to prepare weapons for action, which means that Canadian technology is crucial in the final step of preparing these weapons for action. The majority of the rest of the shipments, you can see them online, but I also want to mention that there are other parts like that are labeled as antennas, sensors, electronic cables, and these might sound like very technical and maybe even boring, but and they might not seem like lethal on their own, but when shipped directly to weapons manufacturers like Elbit System, they're not neutral components. They are like an integral link to the kill chain. They're part of weapons that allow. They're the parts that allow the weapons to find its target, to aim, to communicate, and to strike. So Canada isn't just exporting weapons and material; we're actually exporting functionality. And these are just a few examples of the 47 shipments that we've tracked. And I strongly urge everyone to read, to share the report, because every page reveals more than just every page reveals how deeply embedded Canada is in Israel's military infrastructure. Maybe one last thing I want to mention about these 47 shipments is the fact that to be able to move these shipments, it required over 100 separate flights. And more than 60 of these flights were actually commercial passenger flights. That means that military cargo was being flown on the same planes as like families, students, everyday travelers through major international airports, such as Air Canada, Air France, Air Transit, Lufthansa, and more. So this is not happening in secret. It's moving through our public infrastructure, our airports, our railways, and our ports. And Rachel has, thank you, Rachel, for showing this, but this is essentially a map that shows all the different flows of these 47 shipments. And we can also send this interactive map that Rachel worked very, very hard on for whoever wants to see these shipments in detail. Perfect. I also just want to mention that this report is not just it's not just a collective data. It's a testament to a profound betrayal of public trust by our own government. We're all gathered here out of shared moral refusal, refusal to be accomplices in the genocide in Gaza, a refusal to see Canadian technologies used as instruments of oppression and war in the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iran. Canada's involvement is undeniable and unacceptable. Again, it was very hard to put this all in 10 minutes, but please read the report. There's so much more to uncover. Yeah, maybe one last thing is Rachel showing on the map, essentially what you see in yellow are the companies that we've been able to identify in the report. So there's about 21 complicit companies that we're talking about in the report. But again, this is just a snapshot. There are so much more that have been complicit in arming Israel, in the genocide in Gaza, and you'll be able to see them all on the map that Rachel did. So essentially everything that's not in yellow are companies that have not been named, but are actively aiding Israel's war machine on Gaza. So without further ado, I will now hand it over to Alex Kosh, whose powerful reporting with the Maypole over the past 2 years has relentlessly tracked Canada Arms' trade with Israel and exposed the Canadian government lie after lie.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to start by congratulating the authors of this really, really important report. We now have really damning new details proving beyond a doubt what we've known for quite some time, which is that Canada is continuing to send military goods to Israel. So I'm going to talk about the Liberal government's confusing and sometimes outright false talking points on this issue, which I've followed very closely since the beginning of Israel's genocide in Gaza. So I want to start by noting that calls for an embargo on Israel long predate the launch of Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. But it's clear that the kind of sheer barbarism of this specific campaign and its explicitly genocidal intent mounted pressure on the Liberal government like never before to take action, or at least to have the appearance of taking action. So in the first months of Israel's war, the Trudeau government claimed it had not authorized new export permits for what it called full weapons systems to Israel. It also suggested that any new permits that it had authorized for components of military goods were, quote, non-lethal. And this is actually a word that Global Affairs Canada admitted internally has no legal definition in Canada's export control regime. And rather tellingly, the Liberal government has largely stopped using this term after anti-war activists, like many of those gathered here today, exposed it as the kind of meaningless spin that it is. And of course, this new report reveals new details about the shipments that completely shatter the non-lethal characterization. So back in February 2024, we revealed that the Trudeau government had authorized $28.5 million worth of military exports to Israel during the first 2 months of its war on Gaza. And as a side note, political staffers from Melanie Joly's office, they actually tried to intervene with the disclosures of those data to add a line that claimed that all the exports were quote unquote non-lethal. However, they were rebuffed by civil servants who reminded them that an access to information package is not a government comms product. But even so, pressure on the government to take action at this time was really growing. And so following the passage of a non-binding motion in Parliament in March last year, the Trudeau government said it had stopped authorizing all new military export permits to Israel on January the 8th. Crucially, however, it would allow most permits authorized before that date to remain active. And other glaring loopholes also emerged. In August 2024, the Quebec-based company GDOTS was named by the US government as the principal contractor in a possible $61 million foreign military sale of explosive mortar cartridges to Israel. Melanie Joly actually tried to deny the existence of this contract, claiming that concerns about it were not based in fact. But as pressure mounted, she changed her tune. At a Liberal Party caucus retreat last September, Joly said, quote, "We will not have any forms of arms or parts of arms be sent to Gaza, period. The position of the government is clear and we're in contact with General Dynamics." I may actually have a story about that claim coming very soon, so watch this space. She also revealed she had suspended around 30 existing military export permits over the summer. So while this statement was very clearly intended to give the impression of a blanket ban on military exports to Israel, even more apparent loopholes emerged. So, for example, Project Plowshares revealed that the Canadian Commercial Corporation, which is basically a Crown Corp that works with arms exporters, was under contract to supply the US with up to $78 million worth of artillery propellants, some of which, according to government records, would later be transferred to Israel. There's no evidence that Global Affairs has ever intervened on this transfer, and Liberal politicians have really just simply refused to address it. The Canadian Commercial Corporation, meanwhile, claimed that Israel was not confirmed as an end user of these goods, but it has refused to say whether it had ruled out the possibility that they might end up in Israel's hands, or if they believe that the US government records are somehow inaccurate. Regardless, this new report that we're here discussing today confirms that military goods are, beyond any shadow of a doubt, still flowing to Israel despite Melanie Joly's pledge. We know that $18.9 million worth of goods were shipped to Israel under existing export permits last year alone. So where are we now? Well, Global Affairs' official narrative on the supposed pause on military export permits to Israel has actually quietly changed in recent months. Until as recently as March 4th of this year, Global Affairs said, quote, "It has not approved new arms export permits to Israel, and this remains the government's approach." But the messaging has since changed to specify that the pause applies to goods that it believes, quote, "could be used in the current conflict in Gaza." Global Affairs has refused to answer questions about whether this policy applies to Israel's other military engagements or how it determines whether or not goods could be used in Gaza. Most arms monitoring experts would tell you that this is practically impossible. Regardless, we know that some new military export permits are in fact being authorized. As we recently revealed, the Liberal government authorized 2 permits to Israel with a combined value of $37.2 million back in February. Unsurprisingly, Global Affairs has refused to share any details about the end users of the goods, about the end users or the goods involved, beyond the fact that they fall under an export category that includes bombs, torpedoes, rockets, and missiles. At least one known exemption to the pause on new military export permits is Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, and Mark Carney actually said as much during April's federal election. It's not actually clear if any Canadian companies do supply goods for the Iron Dome, but regardless, this imaginary distinction between defensive and offensive weapons is yet another ruse. Israel's missile defense systems enable it to engage in acts of aggression without fear of serious retaliation. It should also be noted that when Carney was heckled at an election event in Calgary recently, he explicitly claimed that Canada has a, quote, arms embargo, a clear and outright lie. This new report confirms that the non-lethal spin was always a lie, and that claims from Liberal politicians about Canada having an arms embargo on Israel were also a lie. I want to finish by noting that while the Liberal government's talking points are clearly designed to obscure the reality of Canada's military trade with Israel, the fact that they have shifted and changed their narrative over the past 20 months shows that pressure from civil society is working. The Liberal government has clearly felt a need to change, or at least give the false impression that they are changing their policy, even if substance has not yet matched their words. So I hope this new report will finally prompt real and decisive action for a full two-way arms embargo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I really can't overstate how vital his reporting, alongside a crew of honestly mostly independent journalists at the Maple, but across a bunch of other outlets as well, how vital that reporting has been for this campaign and the broader movement. I don't know what percentage, but a large percentage of what the Arms Embargo Now campaign has known over the past year about the Canada-Israel arms trade has come as a result of I don't know how many ATIPs, how many access to information requests Alex has filed, but basically everything we know about the permits that have continued to happen, the weapons that have continued to flow, the backtracks and lies and hidden whatever's from Global Affairs Canada over the past year. So much of that has been the really intrepid, dogged work of independent journalists. And frankly, to the failure of the mainstream media around this. So anyways, big ups to Alex on this and to reporters across many other outlets across the country, the independent ones who have just been showing up over the past year before this was a big story. So, I mean, basically, what we have seen is that we needed the truth. We needed to catch Canada in lies, and based on what Hanina shared, based on what Alex has shared, we have. we have thoroughly caught Global Affairs Canada and the Canadian government and Carney and Trudeau and Jolie and Anand red-handed, and unveiled a really big web of deception, like a really deliberate propaganda campaign. I think that what we're talking about, the scale of the lies, goes far beyond bureaucratic oversight at this point. The average MP who is responding to their constituents and repeating that Canada is not arming Israel, to be honest, they're probably repeating something that they were told from the Canadian government. But the people in charge in Global Affairs Canada, the Foreign Affairs Minister, the Prime Minister, this is a deliberate deception. Yeah, and we've uncovered that, and I want to talk about what has happened since this report dropped and lead us to what's going to happen next. I will say that we knew in making this report, and we know it now, the truth alone will not get us an arms embargo. We need the truth, and we need to lay it out clear. We need everyone to know it, but on its own, that is not what's going to force the government's hand. What we need to force key central decision makers to answer to their lies, to take concrete action, to actually shut down this flow of arms, what we need is to generate a political crisis for them. So because this is a movement call and we're surrounded by hundreds of people who I know want this and are part of this fight with us, I want to actually lay out some of the strategy here for you. We have a bunch of different facets, angles of this strategy of how we're going to win an arms embargo, based on the work that everyone has done over the past 2 years and also based on this report. So the first angle is media. We kicked that off on Tuesday with a big media splash. This report was front page of The Star, Globe and Mail, CBC, National News. It was every hour on CBC Radio. It was on Democracy Now! I should have written down a list. This is off the top of my head. Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera. It was all over. And what that does is make sure everybody knows about this revelation and this really epic foreign affairs scandal from the government, but it also forces the government to answer media questions, ideally, and to be put in the hot seat about this. That media angle is continuing, but that started on Tuesday, and that's well underway. Another angle of what's going to push this from truth to real government action and a real end to the flow of arms is a legal angle. And here I want to give a shout out to various lawsuits that have been underway for well over a year now, effectively suing the Canadian government for not following their own laws around the arms trade. And what this report gives them is a whole bunch of new evidence that they can use for their case to show that weapons were in fact continuing to flow to Israel. That's kind of happening behind the scenes, and it's slow. Another thing that's happening behind the scenes is pressure from within the government, in conjunction with movements and with organizations and with lobbyists. So, one way that manifested is that on Tuesday afternoon, 26 senators of the Canadian government released a letter condemning what this report revealed and calling for an immediate arms embargo. We'll have to see what happens, but I have some faith that a number of members of parliament will also respond with outrage. The fact that they were also lied to, and now that they see what's happening, that they're going to be calling out the government on it. So we'll look out for that. They're also uh, but really, I guess what the reason we're here tonight, and what's going to be the real important factor in whether this is kind of a scandal that makes the government look bad, but that they kind of lie about and keep on with their obfuscations and their confusions and their random statements that make no sense. What's going to make the difference between that happening and them actually being forced to turn a page and actually stop the flow of weapons to Canada and Israel is going to be the big public push. It's going to be our movement push. It's going to be many, many, many people from across sectors, from across the country coming together to create a crisis for the Liberal government right now around the revelations of this report. So I'd love to pass it over to Emma and Johanna with the Palestine Solidarity Network, that is a new organization that came up as this round of genocide started, that has organized so many people across the country to talk about how do we make this crisis starting now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Rachel, for that, and to everybody who's spoken already on this webinar. It's so great to see so many folks here, and it's been so great to see the impact that this report is already having in the media and in our communities, and to see I echo and share the outrage that so many folks are expressing in the chat. It really is scandalous to see the sheer kind of extent and depth of the lies that we've been told. The reason Emma and I are here to talk to you now for a little bit is about what we can do. And I know there's lots of energy in the chat already. People are saying, I want to organize an action. I want to do something with this report. That's what we're here to talk about next. As Rachel said, our movement slice of this pie is kind of taking ownership of organizing the public to use this report in as many ways as possible, to share it as widely as possible, and to use it to force the government's hand. The key decision makers on the arms embargo file are right at the top. So we're looking at the Carney and Anita Anand, a couple other key cabinet ministers. They have a lot of power at deciding what Canada does with this ongoing arms trade with Israel. So we need to really generate a crisis, not just as Rachel said, not just let this report kind of be a flash in the pan, but turn it into a political crisis for those decision makers at the very top. And we're going to do that with a couple different strategies, right? One of the things we want to do is be sharing this report as widely as possible and ensuring that our communities, the public at large, the hundreds and thousands of people across the country that we know would be outraged if they knew the facts in this report, know the facts and are energized and mobilized to do something about it. So that's talking to the people in our lives, getting the word out as widely as possible, and then using all of that energy to direct more pressure on those decision makers. Part of how we're going to do that is through our MPs. So there's our MPs, especially Liberal MPs, we really want to make them feel the heat for the lies that they've told us for the last year and a half. We want them to be calling Carney and calling Anand and asking what's the deal with this report, right? If they get confronted enough from their constituents, they can take that issue up to their own leadership and really help escalate this further and force the folks at the very top to have to reckon with the receipts that this report has unveiled. And to really own up to their own lies and hopefully take that actual decisive action that we need, which is to implement an actual functional and immediate two-way arms embargo. So how are we going to do that? First step, as I said, we're raising awareness and outrage. Everybody in this chat, it looks like, who's actually read this report is experiencing the same thing that I did when I first read it. It is outrageous. And I think the more people who read it, the more people who are faced with the true facts of the situation, have to reckon with the lies that we've been told, and really feel into the complicity of our government in this escalating genocide that's taken place over the last 21 months. We need that to get spread as widely as possible. And then we need to really force the hands of our MPs. So we need to be talking to our MPs and saying things like, you lied to us. Canada never stopped arming Israel. we need an arms embargo now. And we can get that message to our MPs and to the cabinet ministers in a whole variety of ways that we're going to talk about in a second. We also are in it to win it, right? This isn't just we've been at this campaign for over a year now, and we're going to keep going until we have a two-way arms embargo on Israel, and then we're going to keep fighting for a free Palestine. So we're going to kind of be monitoring what the government is up to in these next couple of weeks and being ready to escalate further if needed. We don't know how the government's going to respond, but our hope is that we can use this report, use the scathing new evidence that it's unveiled to really generate a crisis and force our leaders to act with integrity in this moment of absolute crisis. So Emma, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways we can make that happen?
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. Okay, so we're going to go through, many different options of ways to take action. I think in the past, there have been times where we're really directing people towards one way of sort of engaging in this fight for a two-way arms embargo. This right now is a moment where we need everyone to take action. And that might look like having 5 minutes of time in order to send an email, send a message to all of your family members, lifting up this report. Or you might already be a part of or in leadership of an existing organization and be really kind of driving the movement in this moment. And so this next part is really kind of to try to strike all across that broad range of ways that you can take action. And these are things that, again, we have resources, and we keep sort of putting that armsembargonow.ca report in the chat. You will be able to find all of the resources that you need for the things that we're talking about there. So as you're, scribbling down your notes or whatever, all of that is also coming to you. I think before I even get into the specific tactics, I just really want to lift up and name. We had a mass call with members, or a call with some of our core organizers as part of the Palestine Solidarity Network just last night. And one thing that I think has deeply resonated with a lot of people is that the best possible way that we can express our gratitude for just the endless amounts of work that have gone into writing this report, young Palestinians who have family members in Gaza who spent hours into the wee hours of the morning scouring over this data, and our own government's complicity is to now take this report and get it into the hands and across the faces and in front of as many people as possible in all of the parent groups, the family chats, everything in our lives, all of those networks. That I think is the biggest gift that we can offer in order to express that gratitude. And so that's what we're going to talk more about, is how do we help really bring this report to life and give it legs so that it is so useful for our movement and for helping us to ultimately win a two-way arms embargo. And I think the best way to do that, just off the top, is as much as possible in the actions that we're going to talk about, it's best to take action together with others. And that could look like you reaching out to one friend and sitting in your living room and just sending this report off to as many people as possible. Or it might look like you trying to plug into an existing organization that exists in your community. And so in this follow-up email that we'll send you, there's so many groups to get involved in. I know that Labor for Palestine, is in the chat and talking about the work that they're doing to make an arms embargo real. Joining the Palestine Solidarity Network, there are World Beyond War chapters all across the country. And so really encourage you to first look into what organizations already exist in my community who I can engage with in order to take action. Okay, so as Johanna said, this first sort of week following the release of this report, our focus is on getting it out there everywhere, all at once, to as many people as we possibly can, including our own members of parliament. So this is when we're emailing the report to our MP, we're emailing it to key ministers, we're phoning up our MP over our lunch hour as often as we can to say, hey, have you seen this report? The government has been lying to us. You have been lying to us. We're sharing this report across all of our social media. On Tuesday, I was emailing my family members who I engaged with occasionally, but was like, this report was, on the front page of the Globe and Mail. It's above, right at the top of their website. There's major media coverage. This is like a source of conversation for us to bring into all of our chats, all of our networks in order to engage our people. And that's what's really going to help propel this into becoming a political scandal for this government. So make sure that all of your loved ones know about this report, and like spend the time doing that. This, can take 5, it can take 10 minutes. It's very, very easy. Then, as sort of a next step, we want to canvass in our communities, we want to poster in our communities about this report. So there are resources available on armsembargonow.ca/report. You can print out flyers. There are so many street festivals, things going on right now where there are thousands of people that are out in our communities. And so getting this report and this information into as many hands as possible, I think that is a great opportunity to think about. And then the third thing that I want to lift up on the note of really like putting this out there and getting this out there in our communities, there are town halls that are already in the process of being planned all across the country. So there's one in Toronto, there's one happening in Montreal, in Kitchener-Waterloo, and in Guelph. And so I think, hopefully there will be links that are going to come into the chat now for organizers to really plug those town halls. Invite your friends and family members to those town halls, like commit to bringing 5 people, to turning them out so that they can really sit with this information and I think witness the impact and like be surrounded by people who are similarly outraged about the fact that our government has been lying to us. So that's week 1. That's sort of our responsibility and obligation immediately following the release of this report. Get it out everywhere. And that is our job. That's the task that I think we're taking on immediately. And then, like Johanna said, following that, we are taking action to force the hand of our MPs who haven't budged yet. And so if you have, this is where we're taking much more escalated action, and that might look different depending on where you are. But here we're talking about, for example, conducting a pots and pans rally outside of your MP's office. It might be, as you can see sort of on this slide, plastering this report and posters all over your MP's office. So it is unavoidable, this demand for an arms embargo and the fact that they've been lying to us. This is also where, you might want to consider bird dogging your MP. And for those of you who this is, a very new term, our MPs are out in community all the time right now. They're going to festivals, they're speaking at events, they're meeting with their constituents, and really paying attention to what's going on in your community and trying to track down where your MP will be. And this can be as easy as having a sign that says, "You lied to us, armsembargonow.ca," and holding that up behind them, getting photographs of that and posting that across social media. So the more that we can really be hounding on our MPs at every single turn, asking them why they have been lying to us, the more that we can generate this political crisis for them. If you have more time, if you are part of an organization that has been bringing people in, there are other ideas for ways that you can take action that you can find in this toolkit. You might, for example, want to stage soft or hard pickets that are outside your MP's office. So that means sort of handing out flyers to the public as they're walking by, seeing their staff members as they're coming in and saying, "Hey, have you seen this report?" So those are all examples. I know it's been like a huge just blast of all of the ways that you can take action. If there are 2 key things though that you take away, we are trying to target the public with this report, get it in front of as many people as humanly possible, and then we are directing that pressure at our MPs in order to trigger a political crisis for those at the very, very top, Anita Anand and Mark Carney in the Prime Minister's office. So now I'm going to pass it back to Johanna, who's going to get us to take action together on this call.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, thanks so much for sharing. I know there's a lot of conversation in the chat. It looks like people are excited to get to work, and so am I. This feels like such a useful ammunition for us to be like bringing back to our government, our representatives. So what we're going to do right now, in the 2 days since our report launched, so on Tuesday is when this report was finally published and released widely, we set up a digital action to allow us to email our own MPs as well as key cabinet ministers, the key decision makers on this file. And we're all going to take the time right now to send an email. Thousands of people have already done so, and there's over 600 people on this call tonight. So if we all do it now, we'll be able to really flood Anita Anand's inbox tomorrow morning when she shows up at work, which I know we all really want to be doing right now. If you've already taken this action, that's fine. You can do it again and you can personalize the message this time. So take an extra 30 seconds to add your own, add a little bit about who you are, why, what you first felt when you encountered this report. If you've had an interaction with your MP before, if they've personally reiterated some Liberal Party talking points and lies to you, bring that up in your email. Let's really make sure that MPs are feeling forced to answer to this and are actually having to confront the reality of this new report and the new evidence that it unveils. So I'm going to put a link in the chat, and we're all going to take a second to do this action together. But we're not going to stop there because, as Emma said, it's so important that we bring our people with us, that we act collectively, and we could multiply this action by 5 if we all take a second and send this action and this website to 5 people in our lives. So I'm going to put a little draft text message in the chat. Feel free to use it or write your own. But what we're going to do is first send our own email and then send that link to 5 people in our lives so that they can also take action. That's a great way to multiply our impact together. Here's a little example, sample message for you. Bam. And when you have finished both sending your own email and also forwarding it to 5 other people, because we do not want our friends to be left behind, not knowing about the ongoing complicity of the Canadian government, please let us know in the chat or share a little thumbs up emoji and we'll know that we can move on to the next thing. But I too am going to take a moment to just send another email right now.
I just also want to say, I think even as people are, sending their emails, there are many of us on this call who might actually have MPs that have already signed on to the Arms Embargo Now pledge. That's awesome, but their action is not over after signing a pledge. And so at that point, sending a personalized email to say, I'm outraged. I'm sure as someone who has signed on to this, you're outraged too. I want to know what you plan to do in order to organize your own colleagues. We're looking to kind of put pressure, bring these people in a lot of ways as allies, and then demand even more of them. So if that's the case for you, really encourage you to still reach out to them and to ask, what's your plan to get X, Y, Z, other MPs that are all in, whether in their party or in the community on side. And so really pushing for them to do that as well. One final thing, if you have an MP where you're like, I have a conservative MP, I live in an incredibly conservative riding, direct more of your attention at those at the very top, at Anita Anand, at Mark Carney. That is still incredibly, incredibly worthwhile. And the more that we can have people just doing that, phoning those at the very top, it's incredibly helpful.
Amazing. I'm seeing lots of people post in the chat that they've done this. Some people might need another minute or two, but remember, this report is yours to use. This is a tool that is being offered to our movements, to our communities. Our call to all of you here on this call is to take this up in the ways that you are able to, and again, help generate a crisis out of this report and out of the facts that are exposed in it. So this doesn't stop tonight. I know many of you are still working on it and emailing, and we're going to, again, share some resources about some of the tactics that Emma suggested earlier. It's available online, and we'll share that in the chat and in the follow-up email as well. It just starts this week, but this is not the end, and we need to keep building momentum from here so that that these facts are inescapable and our government is forced to act. Thank you all so much, and I'll pass it over to Shweta to wrap us up.
Thank you, Johanna and Emma. And I really, really, in our closing, want to echo what they've been saying, that this report belongs to you. It belongs to every person who refuses to let Canada keep fueling genocide behind closed doors. It was built for the movement, by the movement, to confirm what we already know and give us exactly what we need to win this fight. The government lied to us. They told us the arms trade with Israel had ended. They tried to cover their tracks with bureaucratic language and media smokescreens, but they run out of places to hide, and the truth is public. The evidence is undeniable, and the responsibility to act sits with all of us. So what do we do with this proof? Exactly what Emma and Johanna were saying. We organize, we coordinate, we go all in. This report is not something to sit on. It is something to move with. It is not just a document. It is a political tool to build with, to organize, to politicize every single space. If you're part of a union, bring this report into your meetings, your assemblies, your campaigns. If you're an educator, assign the report, use it in your class, bring it into staff meetings. If you're a student, bring it to your student union, post a teach-in, demand action from your university or your college. If you're in the media, cover the story, break the silence, amplify what the government has been attempting to suppress. If you're connected to a cultural group, a nonprofit, a small business, bring this into those spaces. Every single sector is touched by this genocide, and every sector has a role to play. And if you're just getting started, you're in the right place. This is how we organize on a mass level, not by waiting, not by hesitating, but by moving wherever we are with whatever we have. We are building a movement, a storm of media, legal, grassroots, and political pressure that no minister, no MP, and no arms dealer can hide from. And we're doing it together, person by person, city by city, action by action. So tonight, we leave this briefing not with despair, but with a renewed and collective commitment. We know who is responsible. We know what must be done, and we are going to make it impossible for Canada to keep fueling genocide in our name. Visit armsembargonow.ca/report for the full toolkit and all the resources. And we will not allow them to act like nothing happened. The fight for an arms embargo is in our hands, and we are going to win it. Thank you all, and thank you for all the speakers for joining us today and all their work.